Greetings and welcome. My name is Jake Rayson. I am a wildlife and food forest garden designer, and this is a test run of my workshop that I'm running for a wildlife trust next week. And I've got 44 slides to show, and it should last about 50 minutes, so it's a bit of a chunky one. And this is looking at a forest garden from the perspective of a member of the public who's interested in getting involved in wildlife and also involved in creating a forest garden. So without further ado, let's have a little look at the at all the things. Well, there we go. Excuse a second. Okay, so do excuse the slight rustiness because I haven't really been live streaming very much recently, so this is good practice for me as well, and you get a free little workshop thing on the go. Before I get started, a couple of notes. This is my website, natureworks.org.uk. This slideshow is always online, natureworks.org.uk/talks/forage. And so you can always access the information there. Press the P key on your keyboard, and then you get a whole load of extra info down here. There'll be like extra links and stuff like that in there as well. Okay, so there we go. Let's get cracking. And this is an outline for the day. First of all, agency. It's all about you. This workshop isn't about me. It's actually about you and your engagement with your environment, with your locality, with wildlife, with your garden. So that's the first one. Second one is about a forest garden, a wildlife forest garden, what I mean when I'm talking about a forest garden. Third section is foraging, and this is looking at the process of foraging native plants. And then we're going to look at edible crops in the forest garden. So it's a kind of transition from foraging out in the countryside and then bringing that into your own garden, into your own forest garden. The fifth step is community and the importance of working with other people. And then finally, the kind of practical steps that you can take on this process. And it's a long process. This is just like a short introduction. I've been doing it. I've been forest gardening for 8 years. And it feels like I'm only just starting out. Honestly, it's good though, but it's good. And then you've got a little, oh, that's brilliant, isn't it? You've got a little breadcrumb down the bottom, so you can see whereabouts you are. Okay, so let's get cracking. So agency. This is about you and your ability to take positive action in the face of climate emergency. And this is Canadian wildfire. This is actually photos from about 2016, but you get the idea. There's a lot of bad stuff going down, and it can be very overwhelming, particularly when you're connected to the world via the media and social media and all the rest of it. But there's a lot of stuff that you can do, and I think this is where a forest garden is so good, and a wildlife forest garden in particular, because it's practical steps that you can take. And it's a beautiful quote by a woman called Clarissa Pinkola Estes. Ours is not the task of fixing the entire world all at once, but of stretching out to mend the part of the world that is within our reach. I think this is really, really important. You can't fix everything. You can't mend everything, but by concentrating what's local to you, you can do that. You can do good in the world, and that's your corner. And that will have an effect. That will have a ripple effect on a whole lot of other people that you're not even aware of. So really, you have agency. Yep. You are the person who can make these changes. Excuse the dog barking outside. You are an agent of change, and it's up to you to mend your part of the world, and that's where you are. That's your locality, wherever that is. Okay, I'm going to close that window because the dog's a bit annoying, but there we have it. And this is Martin Crawford's forest garden down in Devon. And this is I just love this. It's a still from a film by a chap. It'll be in the out description. So a lovely photograph because it gives the feeling and the sense of a forest garden. And yeah, this is what it's about. It's about being there in that space. Yeah. So wildlife forest garden, what the heck is it? Section number 2. And I've made you a very special condensed version of a definition for a forest garden. So this is my very own home roll definition of a forest garden. It's an edible ecosystem, growing perennial edible crops, self-sustaining in nutrients and pest control in a woodland edge wildlife garden. Right, so that one sentence sums it all up for me. And there's so much to unpack in that. In that, but that's the that's the definition. I just think if you can refer back to it and have a think about what each part of those, each word means and how it all relates together. Just kind of give you an overview, just to kind of give you a visual representation of this in a cool temperate climate. What we're looking at, which is what we're, I live in the UK in West Wales, and most of the UK is cool temperate climate. The wild nature. This is an illustration from Martin Crawford's book, Creating a Forest Garden. Wild nature. There's a term called climax vegetation, but basically everything around here wants to be a tree. I mean, as in, like, if you leave a field, there'll be brambles, there'll be in pioneer species like ash, and then they will grow up, and then oaks will come along, and everything will grow up, and it will become a woodland, is what it ultimately will be after 50, 60, 70 years. So the further right you go, the more farmed, the more managed it is, and the more energy and the less diversity and the more fragility. So right at the far end you have annual crops, arable cultivation, soils being ploughed year after year, artificial pesticides, artificial fertilizers. It's absolutely hammered. You're getting rid of life, you're growing very little. So you come back, then there's pasture, which is better generally for wildlife, not necessarily in terms of carbon emissions, but for wildlife it's better. Then you have an orchard, and you have a forest garden sits between an orchard and wild nature. So it's like at the edge of the woodland. And there's 5 kind of key characteristics: that it's sustainable, it sustains itself, you're not bringing anything in. It's productive, that you're growing edible crops and other useful harvests as well. It's wildlife friendly by design. You're using all the layers in the forest garden, so it's a good use, it's an efficient use of the space within a forest garden. So you have trees and shrubs and herbaceous perennial vegetables, and you could ground cover strawberries, fungi, climbers. So all the different niches are being used in that space. It's not just like a flat 2-dimensional plane. And most of the crops that you've got are perennial as well. So yeah, could talk at great length about each one of those, but I'm not going to. So the key principles, and I think this is really, really important, is kind of coming back to the principles behind forest gardening, because this kind of informs all types of gardening. So when I started out, I was quite focused on growing edible crops, and that was really most of it for me. But I can see the applications of forest gardening across the board, because it's working. The key principles work for any garden. So working with nature. Martin Crawford's book is called Creating a Forest Garden. Growing edible crops with nature. So you're working with nature is the key kind of principle here. You're using you're not working against natural processes. So you're using natural materials, organic materials, and also, kind of importantly for me as well, as a vegetarian wannabe vegan, it's the kind of vegan aspect. You're not having to use animals in a food growing system. You don't need animals to grow food. Yeah, it's really, really simple. You can have what's called vegan organic, but you don't need animals to grow food. You can grow plenty of food without animals input. And then native plants where possible. This is a really, really big thing for me, like particularly because I do a lot of garden design now as well. So I'm in that crossover between edible gardening, wildlife gardening, and ornamental gardening. But native plants are really essential because native plants have co-evolved with the wildlife, and they provide a food source. It's the leaves. Basically, the leaves are providing a food source for the larval stages of invertebrates, for insects, for bugs. You want things to eat your plants, and then that way you build up an ecosystem, and then you have pest control within that system. So that's the kind of key reason. And then you have flowers. This is like a wild strawberry, Fragaria vesca, and you have flowers which provide good for pollinators, providing pollen and nectar as well. So native plants where possible. Do I come on to this? Again, I could talk about this for hours, but I'm not going to. People at heart, and this is something I've kind of added fairly recently, but it's so important to get people involved. And this is, and whatever level and however you do it, whether that's a management contract, or whether it's volunteers, or whether it's just you and your garden, or you and your family. But it's so important to get other people involved in the garden and in that process, because by having people involved, getting people to care, then people will pay attention and people will learn. If it's separated, then people are disconnected, and what we're trying to do is to bring people back, so it's people at the very, very heart of the garden as well. And you can have both. You can have a wildlife garden and you can have a people-friendly garden. Excuse me. Okay, so next section is foraging, and yeah, this is about it's been, this is a whole other topic, away from forest gardening, but it's so closely related to it. Really recommend just get into foraging, because it connects you with your environment. If you don't have a garden and you live in the city, you can still forage. There's still plenty, depending on where you are, but there are places where you can forage, and there will be fruit trees and fruit bushes and leaves that you can eat, and chestnuts that you can harvest. I used to work in London for a few years, and I was working down in West London, and every day for a few months I was cycling through Hyde Park, and there's a row of sweet chestnuts there. And one year, all the sweet chestnuts were on the ground, and I think they were Polish. There's some Polish people there collecting the sweet chestnuts, because I think there's far more of a tradition of foraging in Poland. I think I spoke to them, asked them about it, and yeah, so there's food. There is foraging everywhere, so it's a really, really good way in, a really nice entrance in. Observing nature closely can be a grand passion, but tasting moves that relationship beyond the platonic. Through the medium of wild plants, the minerals of the places I love have been knit into my bones. And this is, it's a lovely quote. So important that you actually, by just eating a little bit of something, whether it's like a leaf of a hawthorn, or a primrose flower, or whatever, mallow flower, whatever it is, it becomes part of you. Quite literally becomes part of you, and that's just like it's the truth. So it's just quite cool. And yeah, this is maybe I might move this around a bit. So if something's not eating your plants and your garden's not part of the ecosystem, I'll move this to the native plants bit, I think. And yeah, this is kind of really, really important, that if you have it's to think about the whole system, the whole garden, the whole space that you're working in. You want things to be eating your plants, and it's your landscape. Now, it's all very well for me. I'm kind of quite middle class. Went to university. Got a house, got a garden. And a lot of people don't have those luxury. There should be necessities, but they don't have access to that. And that's kind of part of the social justice side of things. It should be, I really, really, really believe in universal education, universal access to education, and housing and green space as well. But we don't have it. But you're going to have to work in the space that you have. And it's your landscape. It's finding your part of the world and what works for you where you are. So find your part of the world. I used to live up in Tottenham in London, and I was working down in the East End somewhere, Shoreditch, and I'd cycle down the Lee Valley. So from Tottenham Hale down the Lee Valley, and that was the route. That was my if I was in London, that'd be my part of the world, because that's why I moved out to the country, because that's where I felt the happiest. And yeah, just find, there are pockets of green about the place, so find where your pocket of green is, where you can be, and eat something wild. This is a picture of a nettle, incredibly useful, very nutritious. Don't eat them once the flowers are formed, because you can get that it's not so good for you. There's a chemical in there. But before the flowers are formed, you can eat the leaves, and obviously wear gloves, and you can make nettle soup and nettle patties and all sorts of things. But what is incredible is every plant is useful. Every single plant. There's a fantastic website called Plants for a Future, which is a database of useful plants, online database of useful plants, and every single species, apart from one I found, the native species in the UK, what is sterile strawberry, Potentilla sterilis, a barren strawberry, and it's not on there. But I think pretty much every single other plant, in some shape or form, and it might have fallen out of fashion or might have fallen out of use, but has some use, is edible, or you can make string out of it, or you can it's got herbal use, or cattle would eat it, or something. It's incredible. It really is. And there's so much knowledge which has been lost, which again I think is so important about foraging, and that knowledge. And it's very kind of specific to kind of locations as well. And the other brilliant website is Plant Atlas. This is more kind of botanical, but it gives a list of all the native plants. And they've revamped it recently. It's really, really good. So it gives you like photographs and an outline of the plant, and a distribution map of where the plant naturally occurs and where sightings have been. So yeah, so I just want to get some couple of photos and I've talked about plants. So just some examples of native plants, edible native plants. This is meadow sweet, Philopendula almaria, and it's edible flowers. Well, you can use them in as a flavouring. Queen Elizabeth's favourite flower or concoction or something cordial. Grows in damp places, part shade, and yeah, don't confuse it with the deadly what do you call it? What's the water hemlock? It is this passing superficial resemblance to umbellifers, members of the carrot family. Can be quite poisonous, but yeah. This is young leaves of a small-leaved lime tree, and they're edible. You can have them in salads and stuff. And then this is primroses. You can eat primroses, and you can crystallize them and have crystallized primrose flowers. And this is a wild strawberry, and you have them. You go and pick them before the birds get them, put them on your breakfast cereal. And then this is a ripening hazelnut. I actually just took this photograph a couple of days ago, funnily enough, and it's in a windbreak. So all those are native, all those are edible. And then we kind of go on to edible crops. So really good thing about a lot of these foraged plants, you can grow them in your garden. So grow them in your garden, and there are a lot of native plant nurseries. I should make notes about this, but let me see if I can make notes here. Hold on. So move ecosystem and list native plant nurseries. So try and find a native plant nursery which is near to you, and then you can support your local nursery firstly, but also they're going to be growing them in the conditions which suit you as well, because if they're local, then they're where they're raised will have the same kind of weather conditions, hopefully. So I've got fantastic, I'm very spoiled. There's a brilliant native plant nursery called Celtic Wildflowers. They do mail order as well, and they're brilliant. Love them, absolutely love them. And they're down in Swansea, and I've got another one, the Wildflower Nursery, and that's over in Pembrokeshire near Haverfordwest as well. So yeah, find these native edibles, and grow them in your garden, and then you can forage them in your garden as well. And this is a time. Which time is it? Oh, I haven't got it written down. I must add plants to notes. This is a wild time. Can't remember what the botanical name is for it, but I'll add a link in. and it's low growing heather and kind of calcareous, kind of like not acid soils, kind of base soils. What do you call it? So like chalkland and heatherland. Well, yeah, not 100% sure. I should have made notes of it. But that you can grow that. That's edible. That you can cook with it, and it's a really really good pea plant as well. And it's kind of creeping, and you can use it in like little rockeries and in between paving slabs and stuff as well. So as an example, but there's hundreds of examples of native plants that you can use in your garden which are edible or useful in some way. Okay, and then so use native plants in your garden and forage them in your garden. Oh, I need to change that as well. Nativars. So a nativar, okay, remove one from list of nativars. I must have plants to notes. A nativar is a cultivar, so it's been cultivated, a cultivated native, and it's the kind of term is a nativar, and they're an awful lot of fruit that you get will be kind of cultivated natives. And the good thing about it is that our wildlife mostly will eat nativars. Oh yeah, let me just make a note of that as well, of nativars. But what you do have to be careful about is with some nativars, for example, there's a shrub called Gelder rose, and it's really really beautiful, and it has these beautiful almost like umbellifer type flower heads. They're flat and open flowers, and they're just gorgeous, like a ring of flowers around the outside with smaller flowers in the middle, and they're gorgeous. Like they're like a proper ornamental plant, and it's very really good very good wildlife plant as well. But the cultivated cultivars, there's cultivated versions of this native species, but they have double flower heads, which are useless because the most pollinators can't get in to the pollen and the nectar. So that's where you've got to be careful about which cultivar you're using. But the list here, I've just got a kind of quick list here. There's thornless blackberries, which I've started growing in a client's garden. Hazels, obviously you can get hazels, there are cultivars of hazels. Raspberries being cultivated for ages, they are actually a native plant, but you can get huge number of different cultivars of raspberry. Same with crabapple. Elephant garlic is actually a native, but it has been cultivated to get larger bulbs. And kale as well is originally a native, but has been bred in all sorts of different ways to form all sorts of different cabbage-based plants. So yeah, growing nativars is kind of pretty easy. And then you've got the near natives. So essentially a near native is 10,000 years ago we had the ice age, ice retreated, plants came in, but not all plants got across before the channel formed. So there's some plants which are near natives, which are like just across the border in the Netherlands or France, and maybe a little bit further afield, and didn't make it back into the UK. So Italian alder actually comes from a bit further south, but they do really really well here, and this is particularly, it's worth bearing in mind about using near natives in particular circumstances, where firstly they'll support local wildlife. So I know for a fact that the sawfly, I don't know what the name of the alder sawfly is, but they do like Italian alder. I can tell you that for a fact. It nearly killed the tree, poor tree. I just found a whole load of them, like hundreds and hundreds of sawfly all over the leaves of a young Italian alder. So make sure that the plant supports wildlife, and check out the conditions. We've had 7 weeks of drought here, and the conditions have been ideal for the Italian alders. The native alders have really struggled. I mean, they shouldn't have. It's on a slope, and I don't know, 10-20 years ago they'd have been fine, but now they are kind of struggling in a bit of a dry patch. Same for the sweet chestnut. They've been here for a couple of thousand years. I think the Romans introduced them. Medlar, which is a near native. I can't remember whereabouts they're from. They're called the open arse fruit, which is a whole other story. Good King Henry. It's like a spinach substitute, traditional perennial vegetable. apple, which comes from, well, it's crossed, but it comes from like the Middle East, so it's fairly near. But lots of stuff will eat apples as well. And then you have the non-natives, everything else. So there's, for example, I'm growing pecans and hickory and walnut, and yeah, they're growing well. And then there's also other particular plants that you can get. This is an autumn olive, which forms a really, really good, really nice shrub with edible berries, very good for pollinators, and you can make a windbreak hedge out of it, and it fixes nitrogen as well. But they can be invasive in certain places, so you've got to be a bit careful of them. But to be honest, I now would only grow them for their fruit, because I really think you should grow native plants where possible, because they grow native plants where possible, and that would be in windbreaks and as ground cover, and as system plants providing nitrogen. So I kind of err towards native plants where I can, but if you're kind of growing it for a specific crop, then go for it. So that's what I said there. Okay, I'm just going to make that clearer in the notes as well. Hold on a second. Non-natives, make it clear where to use natives. Thanks for bearing with me. Okay, and then section number 5 is the community. So let's get back to mending your part of the world. Yeah, from Clarissa's quote. Let's add Clarissa quote to slide 29. And what you need to do first is to find your part of the world. And yeah, as I was saying before, this is, it can be quite difficult. But I think kind of if you start walking around your local environment with an open eye, then you will discover places where there is a possibility to grow like little corners of edible plants, or of native plants, or wildflowers, and kind of go for a small spot and see if people are interested in the project, and just get a little project off the ground. So what I'm trying to do here I live in as I say, I live in West Wales. In a local town, I'm trying to get a wildlife allotments set up, because there are no allotments in the town, and there's a big, I just think it's absolutely appalling that you've got a town which supports a wide area and supports a lot of people, and there are no allotments there. And when I asked a local town councillor, they said there is no land. And I just think this is such a negative and really, really unhelpful approach. Rather than saying, let's find some land, there is no land. We're surrounded by land. Yeah, it's just a question of ownership and a question of access. That's what it's about. It's not about there not being enough land. There is enough land. Kind of pisses me off a bit, but there we go. So I walked around town, and I went to the church. Oh yes, let me just order this. So at the local church, and there's just like this bit here. I must move that one up actually. There's a corner here, and you could make this into a bed. You could make this quite easily into a bed with a couple of shrubs in it, low growing ground cover, wouldn't need mowing, be very beautiful, possibly herbaceous perennials in there as well. Just a little corner, keep it neat and tidy, little minimal weeding and edible food, and it'll be great. So let me have a look here. Hold on, add graveyard flowers next to first slide. So that was one of them. This is the an old people's home in the town. And you can just see great sways, and this is I'm not terribly sure it's owned by actually, but anyway, point being, there is great kind of sways of land here, and a bit further on, just down the bottom here, there's this great big chunk of land, and it's not doing anything. It's being mown, it's using up resources. There are fruit trees about the place, just on the other side of the road from here, but plant some fruit trees. get someone in to do the pruning, plant fruit trees at the very minimum. So there's lots of spaces, and this is an example in the town where someone that has started doing that, and they've been putting trees in. I think there's a rowan tree here, and they put trees in down the bottom here, and they put some raised beds in, and that's good. Look, just like what a difference that makes straight away. And yet they've got a patch which they're leaving wild. There's a nice bit of docks there. They've got very straggly. They've put the yarrow into the raised beds, and it's very rich soil, so the yarrow's gone very, very tall. But hell, it's brilliant. Love it, absolutely love it. This is the graveyard bit, a bit earlier on. This one here, and someone's planted some oxeye daisies, I think they are, on his grave. And you go, yeah, totally. Just that is 100% better than just grass, and it doesn't need mowing. So what's not to love about it? So yeah, find your corner, find a corner, find anywhere. This is in town. This is by the police station. A great big space down by at the back of the police station. There's a bit of colour there. There's some bedding plants that they put out. But there's so much more that you could do with that space. There's a whole space there that people use and walk past. And what have you got? You've got like a dandelion growing up on a whole bit of brickwork. There is a lot that can be done. And I really think the council ought to be supporting people in this as well. Anyway, so the next one is, this is the last one. This is the back of the dentist, and that's half an acre. And they're not doing anything with it. It's half an acre of grass and a slope, and no one looks out the window. You could have a whole allotment there. Anyway, there is land out there. There's plenty of land, but it's just finding the land to fit. Find your land where you can fit in. But really, really importantly is find your people. Find someone who you can work with. And I think councils are absolutely shite working with people. I've made a few contacts with town council, county council. Oh, I'm interested in doing this. Well, they can't help you. It's happened half a dozen times, and it's dispiriting. But the more of you there are, the harder it is to ignore you. So find your people, get together, find your people, make a bloody noise, make a stand, and demand this. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to find your people. To be honest, I think find your people first and then find your land. Okay, so rant over. Practical steps. I'm just going to go like four practical steps. But this idea of working with other people is so important, to have that support. Find your people, find your land. Start small. Start with a corner. Start with like a little somewhere to go. Rather than it being, let me just see if I can do this. Hold on a second. No, it's not doing it. Never mind. Find a small corner to go, and then you can build on it. Yep. Don't feel you have to get like a whole complete, massive, great big garden or huge, great multi-million-pound project. If it's like a pot in the corner by the side of the road in the town centre, that's a good start. And in some respects it's better because that focuses your mind, and that's just like that thing that you're doing, that's the focus of your attention. And I'm good at giving out advice. I'm bad at following my own advice because I do tend to kind of overstretch myself a bit. So start small and then keep going, because this is an ongoing process. It's like day-to-day stuff. It's life. It's like it keeps on happening. So yeah, keep going, keep chipping away, and then get help and funding. There is help and funding out there. I will add links for. Let me add links. Add links for organised orgs and funding. So yeah. Oh yes, I will. I'll add some links to that. So these links will actually go in. So if you look at the slideshow, you will get these links in the slideshow. If you press the P key, the links will be there. And then practical tips. This is kind of general forest gardening practical tips. which I found really useful over the years. This is what I really focus on. The first one is paths define areas. Access is really, really important. I went to see a garden yesterday for some design work, and it was really interesting. What was so interesting about it was that I just immediately thought about the paths and about the access and how to get from the house to this particular part of the garden, and what path would work best and what angle would work best, and how the people who are using the garden would get there, and how much maintenance it would require and how much money it would cost. But all these factors, it's all around the path and the access to it, and then what the shape, you kind of carving out different shapes with the paths. So whatever kind of space you have, paths can make a massive difference to defining the areas, just like in the general, like what bit of space gets used for what. And that's a general kind of design kind of tip. And as part of that is tree spacing. So then trees form the structure. So you've got your paths and then you get your trees, and that's the structure for your design. And the tree spacing, in a forest garden, you don't want trees really close together. It's the edge of woodland, so you want a gap of quarter to a half of the average canopy diameter. You want a bit of a gap in between trees. You don't want them close together because that'll just shade everything out. So a bit of a gap. And then windbreaks are really, really important. If your space isn't sheltered, and this actually applies across the board, not just to trees, but also to other beds and stuff. Grow windbreaks, and that will shelter the plants from the wind without shading them out, but it will shelter the plants, and then they will grow far quicker for you. And then what I love using, so you plant a living windbreak, and then you use native plants if you can, and get the right height. So you plant them to the final size. So what I do love using, depending on the space that you have, is dead hedges. And a dead hedge is basically 4 posts in the ground, and you put old branches in, and that creates a temporary windbreak until your living windbreak gets established. Ground cover, really, really important to get kind of ground cover in. Don't ever have bare patches of ground. And I think it's kind of interesting I've done my fair share of annual vegetable growing, and not really my thing, to be honest. It really isn't my thing. But even in that, I'm going, well, there must be a better way of doing this. Perennial vegetables, but with a ground cover, so you're not bloody weeding all the time. Yeah, keep that ground covered. Keep it full. Keep it filled with plants, filled with a ground cover, or filled with herbaceous perennials. Get that ground covered. And then nutrients, growing plants that provide nutrients, whether that's nitrogen fixing plants like alder or members of the pea family, or whether that's potassium rich plants like comfrey. I mean, growing big chunks of comfrey everywhere is always a good for a laugh. Okay, so there we go. Oh, that's good. I'm just going to give those references again. I did have some links here actually. Yeah, that's cool. So Plants for Future, fantastic database. Plant Atlas of useful edible food. Plant Atlas, botanical reference of UK plants, gives you a map of what plants are native to where. Database of insects and their food plants will tell you, it's a bit geeky, but it will tell you, it gives you an idea of what insects are eating which plants, and why natives are way better why most natives are way better for wildlife than non-natives. Incredible edibles. They set up urban-based gardens, so just really, really good. Do check them out. And then the National Allotment Society, haven't had much to do with them, but I imagine they've got quite a fair bit of information. I'm going to find out, for a future project, the Wildlife Allotment Project. I will be getting in touch with them. Okay, there we go. Weighing in at under 40 minutes. Fantastic. Thank you very much for watching. If indeed you have been watching, and if you can see me saying this, then you have indeed been watching. Most of the videos that I do actually have an average. People watching it for an average of about, 2 minutes 30 seconds or something. But there we go. It's been very useful for me. Thank you for bearing with me and just kind of ironing out this slideshow that I'll be giving in a couple of weeks. I'll be giving a talk in a couple of weeks' time. So there we have it. See you again soon. Like, subscribe, do what the hell you like, really. Get out there, get gardening.